Well, it's finally here, the moment everyone's been waiting for, the 2025 legislative session. Okay, you might not be as excited as, we here at 1819 News are about it, but it is very important, and I want to get you psyched and pumped and paying attention because there's a lot that can be done at the state level, and your input can make a huge difference to make Alabama a better state for your children and grandchildren and generations to come. So we're going to be diving into that. We're going to talk about the state of the state. How did Kay Ivey do? I wasn't there. I sent Jeff. Thank God I was able to send Jeff and I didn't have to go. And we're also going to be diving into things that we anticipate seeing in the legislative session. The overtime tax is a really, really, really big one. I'll just kind of tease that one out. You have a Democrat who's pushing for tax cuts while a Republican supermajority is like, I don't know. Alpha Health Insurance, Big Ten mayors trying to increase taxes, Glock switches, innovation districts, and all kinds of other stuff that matters, and it matters to you. And so please tune in, pay attention, and buckle up for a little bit of education on what's going on here in the Alabama legislation. Coming up on 1819 News, the podcast. We have an incredible culture here in the state of Alabama, but our politics and public policy don't reflect the people of Alabama. Media drives culture. Culture is what drives politics and public policy. Welcome, everyone, to 1819 News, the podcast. I'm Brian Dawson, CEO of 1819 News and host of this here podcast, where we're in pursuit of a free and flourishing Alabama every single week. Today, that we're recording this at 9 o'clock at night, is the official start of the 2025 legislative session, and that's a big deal for us at 1819 News. A big part of what we do is cover the state legislature, really like no one else does. We've got 2 full-time reporters down there, and Jeff makes regular appearances every week, so we've really got 3 people working the legislature, 1 committed to the House, 1 committed to the Senate, and then Jeff kind of flying in between. So I'm pretty sure that's more than anybody else has. Pretty sure. Well, anyway, we'll get more into that. But we're going to talk a little bit about Kay Ivey's performance and what she had to say at the State of the State. I was not there. Jeff was. So he'll be giving us his thoughts on that, kind of his assessment. Then we're going to do a legislative session preview, bills that we think, what the focus is going to be, some of the big bills that we're hearing about. And really just that's going to be the podcast. I think is one of our goals is to get the people of Alabama focused more on what's going on in their state. Everybody watches Fox News. Everybody sees all the stuff that's going on in D.C., and that's great. And I think it's wonderful that people pay attention to that. But there's so many things that happen right here closer to home that they could actually do something about that affects them at a much, much greater, in a much more bigger capacity that they can, and again, that they could do something about. So we want to talk about that, bring that kind of education to our listeners and our readers. And so that's what today's podcast is going to be. But our overtime segment, Jeff and I are going to talk about Trump's first 14 days in office and how exciting that's been and kind of what our thoughts are on that. Can he keep going at this pace for 4 more years? Can anyone handle that? Hopefully. So, but before we jump in, I want to tell you guys, please, on the YouTube page, go to YouTube, 1819 Podcast. Like, subscribe, share, comment, all of those things. It helps get the algorithm boosted so that our content gets out to more and more people. Please do that. Again, just leave a simple comment. I can interact with you guys in the comments thread, all of that, and that helps us reach more people. And also newsletter and then supporting us can all be done at the website 1819news.com. You can either click subscribe to sign up for the newsletter if you're not getting that, or you can become a member. Membership start as little as $5 a month. So please go do that and support this work. So, all right, well, jumping right in. So no one has ever seen what we're seeing on the national political stage right now, ruthlessly executing his agenda. Trump's agenda, that's what he ran on. He's not, ran on this and then is like ruthlessly executing this thing that's not that. He said what he was going to do and he's doing it. That's rare. We've not really seen that. And nothing seems to be off the table. He's wielding power for what is objectively good, and he's doing what he said he was going to do. And so here's my question before we jump into the state of the state, Jeff. Do you sense this energy? I was in D.C. for the inauguration, and I mean, from the moment he got sworn in to today even, it's unbelievable. I mean, conservatives are winning at a level that we've never experienced before because we've never had an elected official actually wield power for what is objectively good and do what they say that they were going to do. Do you feel any of that energy trickling down into our legislature here in Alabama and any of our elected officials statewide, representatives, senators?
It's a fascinating phenomenon, because I would have thought, wow, look at Trump go, and then would people look around and say, wait, well, why aren't we doing that here?
Yeah.
But just kind of talking to some Montgomery insiders tonight, they see it the opposite. They see as well, yeah, Trump is taking up all the spotlight, all the stage, and it's probably going to make session a little quieter, because we're not going to be expected to do as much. People are going to be so focused on federal politics, national politics, and he's doing all this stuff. And I'll say this, I mean, I think you kind of saw a sort of what we could expect out of the legislative session. Nathaniel Ledbetter today, during his press gaggle, all the lefty reporters, are you going to do Medicaid expansion? Are you going to do Medicaid expansion? And he said, no, we're gonna wait to see how this Trump administration works out before we do anything like that. And he gave a similar response a couple of months ago on my radio show about IVF, and I wonder if that's going to be sort of the response. Like, look, we could do a bunch of stuff at the state level, but we probably ought to get out of the way of the federal government right now and let them do their thing. And whether you think that's satisfactory or not, I don't know. But and I'm talking about the general you.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a relatively quiet session for that reason.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll take a quiet session over the session we had last year. I don't know. There were some good things that got done, but there's so much more that could have got done if it wasn't completely taken up by gambling. Yeah, it's crazy to me, and it seems like if I was an elected official, which will probably never happen, but if I got elected and, I ran on the same things that Trump ran on, and now Trump's doing those things, it seems like it's like, oh, okay, well, now I could go ahead and start to do those things. But that's sad.
Well, yeah, and I think that there's some things that Trump's demonstrating that you could be very effective with.
Yeah.
If you just want to do it, right?
Yeah.
We had this controversy with the Veterans Affairs Board here in Alabama, last year, and it resulted in the firing of the commissioner, Kent Davis. But it wasn't, it wasn't any political maneuvering. It was this declaration from Governor Ivey saying she's the chief executive, she's the chief magistrate, she had the supreme executive authority. And yeah, okay, if you want to call it that, and you're going to use it, and there's a court precedent there. She, when Riley went in the bingo wars, went to war over that, and Troy King was, refusing to cooperate, and there was that split that the Supreme Court, ruled in her favor, or ruled in Riley's favor. So there's precedent there. Well, think of what she could do with that. Is she could just say, no, we're not doing, does she even need the Alabama legislature to do away with DEI? Do we need a weak divisive concepts bill?
Yeah.
Do we, so much of the power is in the legislature, but if you take this precedent to its logical ends, the governor could be doing a lot of the things I think you see Donald Trump doing right now.
Yep. And it's sad because, we are I would argue, the most conservative state in the nation. We have a Republican supermajority, and then, we're watching what's happening in D.C., and it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen here. That's what my whole podcast was on last week, is really just going over all the wins, and then, where's our Donald Trump? So we'll see. We talked about that last time you came on the podcast, kind of, what we may see in a governor's race. Obviously, Will Ainsworth, rumors about Tuberville running, and speaking of the ADVA commissioner, Kent Davis, a lot of different names floating around. Maybe we can talk about that later. Right now, I just want to dive in. Speaking of supreme executive power of this state, what was the state of the state like with Governor Kay Ivey?
I don't know what we were to expect. She did talk about bringing in the Veterans Affairs Secretary or Commissioner into her cabinet. Some changes there. A lot of it was kind of backwards looking, I thought. This woman loves some Dolly Parton Imagination Library. That seems to be in every speech It was more of a review of some accomplishments, stuff that we already knew. There was going to get applause lines, the support of the people in the room. Now, I'll say this about the setting, Brian. Not every lawmaker goes to this, okay? It's not like the State of the Union.
Yeah.
It's not the spectacle that that is. Now, there are a lot of lawmakers there, but, I mean, a bunch of lawmakers at ball games tonight in different places. It's nothing like what you see on, like, a State of the Union address. So I kind of wonder, like, the people who were there were the true believers in this governor. Her biggest proponents in the Alabama legislature. Not to say that she has many detractors. You didn't see many Democrats there tonight.
Yeah.
You saw a few, but it's not the same sort of thing. So when you get these big applause lines, it's not as if the entire Congress is cheering on the commander in chief. It's a little bit different. But it was mostly a retrospective. I always find the KIV State of the State on occasion will give you, she's going to do this big project or she wants to do this. But it's more of like, well, this is what we've accomplished. This is like we've done. And early on, Brian, when she first started giving this speech after she took over for Bentley, there was a lot of talk about steering the ship of state back in the right direction, not embarrassing Alabama. And then now the approach is more like, look at all the jobs I've created. Look at, crime going down in certain places. We're going to do this to make it go down even more. It wasn't like a very aspirational speech. It didn't, it was, it wasn't a bad speech. But I'll say this is an important point. After the address came, if it was done, these media organizations or these associations around Montgomery will send out media statements, and you had the Alabama Republican Party and the Alabama Education Association both applauding Governor Ivey for a good speech. That kind of tells you the barometer is just, it's just not it wasn't a particularly polarizing speech.
Yeah. Just status quo. Everything stays the same. Everybody keeps getting what they get from the feeding trough.
Well, and let me say this real quick. It wasn't. This is the difference. The last, speech was it talked a lot about gambling. We didn't do any of that this time.
Well, praise the Lord.
It's an improvement. I mean,
Yeah.
there wasn't any big picture, big government sort of solutions. And sometimes I guess the best we can hope for is saying less, and we got less tonight.
Yeah. Well, and I think what we're hoping to see, I think what I think the people of Alabama are longing for in the conversations that I have with people all over the state. I've written about this in our magazine pieces and elsewhere. Is someone that can, in that setting or any setting for that matter, cast a vision for the state. This is who we are. This is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. Very basic, very clear. Here's the things that are messed up. Here's how we're going to fix them. You have Alabama Department of Corrections as a train wreck. Alabama Department of Mental Health. Alabama Department of everything.
Right.
Here's my plan for each of these things. And it's not that. And that to me, that's what leadership is someone who can cast a vision that everyone else buys into, and we know where we're going, and we're going to make sacrifices to get there because we believe in our leader and our leader's vision for our state. It's just been not that.
I'm stealing this from somebody, and I won't attribute it to who I'm stealing it from, but you're hearing it here. It's like we're still in this Robert Bentley hangover.
Yeah.
Now let me explain. Like, we had a crazy few years there where Mike Hubbard had his problems. You get Roy Moore kicked off the state bench again, and then you have a governor who's has to resign, and then you had I was just kind of borderline chaos, and Kay Ivey comes in and she just kind of calms everything. And people were that's what we were in the mood for.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, this was 8 years ago when all this was happening, and we haven't left that phase of like calming the waters. We got the waters calmed. Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Now we can start doing something. And we're still kind of in this, well, no, we're just, steady and easy. Yeah, and even like the gambling effort, Brian, last year, I mean, it wasn't like Kay Ivey was out, banging a drum.
Yeah.
She had her staff twisting arms in the statehouse, but I mean, she wasn't like, giving big roaring speeches to big crowds or anything. So it's where we are. It's like, we are in this recovery phase still, even though we're recovered, we're still acting like we're recovering from all the tumultuous things that had happened in 2017.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I definitely never thought about it that way, and yeah. Well, as I'm with you, the waters have been calmed. It's time to stir things up a little bit and get going somewhere. All right. Well, let's move on from that and jump into the legislative session. It seems every year that I've been really paying close attention to state government, which is nowhere near as long as you have, which is why I have you come on to talk about these things. It always seemed like there was a focus. The gas tax, we're going to get that done. Medical marijuana, we're going to get that done. And they twist arms, they do whatever to do that. And obviously, several times they've done big gambling pushes. Does there appear to be a major focus of this legislative session that whether it's Ledbetter, whether it's Gudger, whether it's Kay Ivey, whatever, coming out saying very clearly, we're going to get this done for the state this year?
It's not particularly clear about the Senate for a couple of reasons. Gudger now, as of today, as of airtime, where we're taping this, he just got officially won the pro tem seat. And the problem is, if you don't have a pro tem during a pre-filing bill stage, you can't have bills pre-filed with no pro tem to sign them.
Yeah.
So we don't really know what's going on there yet. I suspect that'll clear up here in the coming days. In the House today, during his press gaggle, I mean, Speaker Ledbetter really, he didn't show a whole lot. I mean, he just kind of talked about getting back in town, but he did put he sort of said we're not doing Medicaid expansion this year.
Yeah.
I think the talk is all about immigration. A lot of discussion about immigration, and will we revisit HB 56? If you recall, HB 56 was a law passed in 2011. Your buddy Scott Beeson was one of the sponsors, the title sponsor, the Beeson-Hammond Act. And it wasn't necessarily a bad bill. It just, number one, you obviously had problems in the courts, but the courts have changed now. The first Trump administration, the first Trump term changed the judiciary, the federal judiciary, that gave that bill so many problems. And the second thing is, you have a much, much different attorney general I think would be way more eager to defend something like this with General Marshall than he did with General Strange, Luther Strange. He just, he wasn't, his heart wasn't in it for whatever reason, and we could debate that sometime, but I think things have changed now. They got to learn their mistakes from the past, but, you hear a lot about immigration and modeling probably something like what Texas has done. You may not be able to enforce federal law, but if you come to the state of Alabama and you get employed, let's say you're using a fake identification or somebody else's, information, that's something the state can regulate. There's case precedent for that. Was it when you go to Florida? I don't know how often you drive to Florida and you use an interstate highway. When you get there, if you're crossing on I-10, 75, or 95, it says Florida uses E-Verify. There's things like that they could do to discourage the hiring of illegal immigrants at places in Alabama. And it is a problem. I mean, we have these poultry producing plants. We have these auto plants. We have all these places that in the past have been problems. The state could do things to discourage that and discourage illegal immigration coming to Alabama. So that's one of the big things. You're hearing a lot of talk about that now. Had Kamala Harris won the presidency, I think you probably would have seen a special session. Yeah. And you would have seen something very, very aggressive. Yeah. But I still think there's the mood to do that. And there's a bunch of small bills. they're looking at. But don't hold your breath anticipating a big gambling push. They lost. The problem is with that, they don't have the numbers anymore. They'll always have the numbers in the House, but the Senate is probably off the table. They lost Greg Reed. You're picking up another member in Walker County, Matt Woods, probably. He's got 2 Democrat opponents, but I can't see a Democrat winning that race. And he voted no on gambling. He's one of the brave ones in the House who voted against it. In the House, despite Ledbetter's push for it, there's no reason to think he's going to vote for it in the Senate.
Sure.
And they had to come up with 2 more votes. And even if they get Albritton, who, I think was acting with the interest of his constituents, the Porch Creek Indians, even if they get him to come along, they still got to flip a Lance Bell or a Senator Elliott or somebody like that. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And there's still a level of vigilance because everything is smoke and mirrors. And last year there was definitely some stuff where we thought it was dead, and then all of a sudden it popped, back to life.
Back to life.
Yeah. All right. Another subject I've been hearing a lot about is the overtime tax. Kind of summarize the situation there.
This is a big one, and I they can Senator Arthur Orr, I think an honorable actor in all of this. He's the education budget chairman, but he's really bothered by it. So when they passed it last year, 2 years ago, they thought, well, the projection was like in the 30 millions or something of what it was going to cost, the hit that the Education Trust Fund budget was going to take. You'd have that less revenue coming in on the education budget. Okay, so we can afford that. Now, keep in mind that the education budget's $9.3 billion.
Yeah.
That's a big number, okay?
Yeah.
It's nearly 3 times the size of the general fund. So to put that in perspective, guys, all the education spending, this would include K through 12 and the colleges and universities and all of that, is they spend 3 times as much on that as they do everything else the state does. Prisons, roads, state troopers, whatever else goodness the state government that's spread around throughout the fruited plain in Alabama. We do way, 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 way more education than anything else.
But just look at the ROI, man. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, I'm a product of Alabama Public Schools, both of Auburn University and the Shelby County school system here. But I get it. Like I lived through proration when Democrats one party rule in this state, and you had some weird times there because most of my life until 2010, you had there were a few exceptions there with George Wallace and Don Singleman, but you had a Republican governor and you had a Democrat-run legislature, and it just led to these awful situations where the legislature would just over budget, overspend, and then they'd run out of money at the end of the year. And then the Republicans came in and said, we're going to stop doing that. Yeah. So now, you have, I think, 2 very honorable actors on the Senate side who are charging the budgets, despite his gambling tendencies. Senator Albritton is like a goalkeeper. Whenever somebody comes to him for money, he tells them no. The same is true with Orr. They're you think these budget chairmen have all this power and they can just buy off political support, but they don't treat it that way. They really do treat it like, no, we're going to have a budget. We're going to stick to it. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. And that, unfortunately, will include, tax relief.
Yeah.
Well, so I had him on my radio show, and we're talking about how did y'all miss this? So it was supposed to be $30 million. Now it's like $200 million, and that $200 million is just a fraction of a $9 billion education budget, right?
Yeah.
So but it's enough for him to be very, very concerned about it. And he's like, well, maybe we need to put a cap on it. Maybe we need to do something else, And I asked him, I was like, Senator, why don't we just cut spending somewhere? And he gave me a chuckle. Like, that's just not the way it works, Jeff. We don't really do that. And this just to kind of leave the overtime tax itself aside as an issue. In this era of Doge and right now we're shutting down U.S. aid, and And all that may be very small, minuscule compared to the humongous federal budget. Now's the time to start saying, hey, no, we're not going to spend money on a health sciences academy in Demopolis or whatever. I don't know whatever pet projects. I'm sure there, but we're not even having these discussions right now about reducing the size of government. Instead, it's just like, well, the goal is always to keep it flat, to keep it or to have the increase, but not overspend, keep it within budget. And with this overtime tax, it's fascinating. So last year, I think Anthony Daniels, he was a Democrat leader. He was an architect of this.
Yeah.
I keep saying last year, but 2 years ago. And he was the guy. Like he took an issue that should have has historically been a Republican issue, which is tax cuts, and made it a Democrat issue. And it was kind of funny. I remember talking about it. I think you and I even talked about it on one of your podcasts. Yeah. But like, look, you have a Democrat who's acting more conservative than this Republican supermajority.
Yep.
And it was sort of a smart thing for him to do. He kind of forced Republicans to, well, we can't say no to the one conservative thing we're going to do this year. It's like, and he got it, and it turned out to cost a lot more. Well, now this is going to sunset, right? They weren't sure when they budgeted it how much it was going to cost. LSA gave them kind of their best guess, and they missed it by a lot. But they were very, very, cautious. Look, we don't know how to figure this or calculate this. And they gave them a low number, and that got the lawmakers to go along with it. Well, now you're having some, sort of buyer's remorse from some of these budget chairmen or these people in the budget committee, I should say. But, Brian, do you think a Republican supermajority, if you base it on the Grover Norquist, the definition of a tax increase, if they allow this to sunset, this overtime tax exemption to sunset, and we go back to paying state income taxes on overtime earnings, is that not a tax increase?
Absolutely it is.
And it's going to be with Democrats kicking and screaming bloody murder not to do it. You've got to keep this thing in place.
Yeah.
I mean, this is bizarro world, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where you're going to see some excitement this session is, what are they going to do? Are they going to keep a tax cut in place? Are they going to let it expire? And I think there's some Republicans who would just assume see it expire, that everything's going pretty good. But look, it's just like the K-Ivy discussion, Brian. It's just like we need to calm the waters. We need everything we're in recovery mode, and we're locked in this recovery mode. Well, this situation with the budgets is sort of the same thing. We dealt with proration. We had proration when I was growing up. As a product of the public schools, as I mentioned, we had proration. We had all this, just bad government in Alabama, and they elected a Republican majority in 2010, and it started right away, and it was sort of like, okay, we need to get back to keeping things within the lines, within the budget, and not running out of money at the end of the year, at the end of the fiscal year. We need to make sure we always have enough money, and they filled all these rainy day funds, and they made sure there was plenty of money in case something happened. And I think the times have changed. I don't think that we need we need a different approach to government spending now, where a Republican supermajority, the people in the state have spoken. They elected a Republican supermajority. That suggests that the people in the state want conservative government, not just managed government, but conservative government. They want less government. That's historically what we think of. We talk about conservatism. And I think it's time to start having these discussions. We got to get this, this growth of government under control. And we also got to start thinking about ways to make government smaller. And the problem is we're not even having these discussions about it. It's just kind of being managed, and when you do bring it up, you get laughed at.
Yeah. No, it's been bizarre ever since, again, probably the last 4 or 5 years that I've really been, kind of glued in, trying to pay attention to Alabama politics and learn about it. like you said, you have a Democrat who's trying to cut taxes, and then the Republicans like high five each other when we have record budgets. It's like they're like, because all their friends are business owners, and they see their bottom line going up, and their friends high five each other because they own businesses and their profits. And then these guys are like, look, we're growing ours too. We're growing ours too. It's like, yeah, but it's government. It's not a business. It's not supposed to grow. What the hell are you doing?
It's a bizarre way of thinking. So, and I had a lawmaker on my radio show the other day, and it's always like, well, we're going to have record education spending. Isn't that great? It's for the kids. And I like, what Republican meeting do we, celebrate this? This isn't, what did I miss? And then I think, I'm not saying that you're going to have, obviously with inflation and different things, you're going to obviously be spending more as the value of the dollar goes down. But to celebrate it, to make it like, hey, pat ourselves on the back, we have a record education budget again, it misses the point. And it shows you, like I said, I think these are honorable people trying to do the right thing. They're so misguided on this one. They missed a point. We didn't elect a Democrat supermajority. We elected a Republican supermajority. And I think that's, I don't know where this notion came from, but it's sort of a Montgomery mentality. Like, wow, look at what we're spending on the school kids, on education. Yeah. And like you said earlier, like, what's our ROI? And it's hard to know.
Yeah.
Now, look, things have gotten better.
Yeah, we went from
scores have gone up and everything.
To 49th. Like, woo.
Sure. But, I mean, things have gotten better and scores are up. And I'm not, but the way you're growing it, I think we have an anticipation for something, a little more substantial.
Yeah. And it's like you said, with the playing defense with the budgets, I like Arthur Orr. He's definitely one of the good guys down there. But, with school choice, I think they got way more people that applied for school choice than they ever anticipated.
Right.
And then it's going to be like, oh my gosh, it's like, well, it's like, okay, if you want to spend money on kids, here's an opportunity where you can actually do something that is actually going to get real ROI. It'll be interesting to see if they expand that or what they do there.
They'll expand it. I think that's the tailwinds are coming, and I think that will grow. I mean, it's supposed to become more encompassing than it is now, and it's just a matter of funding it. And this is where Democrats. It's kind of interesting in line for Democrats. Well, they would not fund school choice, obviously. But they're like, well, why don't we just give that money back to people and not do school choice? Why don't we take whatever line item and just give them a tax rebate or whatever? And that's, I guess it's better than where they used to be, instead of just, spending more of their money on whatever AEA hobby horse, whatever the day was. But it's kind of a weird dynamic.
Yeah. All right, well, let's keep burning through them. Another real big thing I remember from last session, hearing about it, the Alpha health insurance alternative. Kind of summarize what's going on there and what you think we'll see.
Well, I mean, I my understanding now they're going to try it again. Now Alpha's made a few enemies for whatever reason. I don't think that they were as aggressive opposing gambling. They just, if anything, they really stayed out of the way. But there's some people that have kind of put a target on Alpha unfairly, I think. And it's going to make this hard, but Alpha wants to have their own health insurance plan. Now, I just read a story about it today. I think, obviously, Blue Cross Blue Shield's going to oppose it. And I know the American Health Association or something, American Heart Association, their lobbyists came out against. I don't know, but it just reeks of like, hey, we don't want another player here in the health insurance game in Alabama, and that's, you got some very the big mule is Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Yeah,
that's going to fight it because it's in their business's interest.
Yeah. No, and it's a crazy situation to have a monopoly on healthcare insurance, and I'm sure that all stems from Obamacare. And seems like if you have one insurance provider and everybody has to use it, they can continue to increase the premiums while also increasing the level of pay that you can get on government insurance, right? And I guess Medicaid if it used to be $40,000 as a household income, well, the premiums go up to $1,600 a month for a family, and then all of a sudden $100,000 a year you can get Medicaid. It's like they're trying to move everyone over to government subsidized insurance. It's crazy. But yeah, some competition there would be much welcome, and so I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. Big Ten mayor is trying to increase sales tax. I know the talking point there is that the internet is basically stealing all of their brick and mortar revenue that they were getting, and so they want to explain that.
Well, I mean, this is another one of these tax increases, and it's being labeled as fairness or whatever. Stop it.
Yeah.
But the mayor in Tuscaloosa, Walt Maddox, kind of leaned the charge on this, but it's not like anybody's really opposing it. Essentially, when they first did the SSUT, and it's not simplified as the name would suggest, but they try to come up with like a number that every state, every municipality in the state could agree upon. Because you have sales taxes in municipalities, do they vary, right, from one to another? Well, the highest tend to be in these big cities. The highest tend to be in Mobile, Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville, to some degree Tuscaloosa, Madison, Decatur, Dothan, and Auburn. I think I got all 10 in there. And those are your Big Ten, and they want to get the sales tax on the internet up to where the tax on the brick and mortars are, and they argue that the system's being abused. That say, like, for example, if you're going to go buy some construction material at Home Depot, if you buy it on the app and then you go pick it up at Home Depot, you're paying less tax than if you just went to Home Depot and went through the checkout line and bought it, and that's not right, and it's taking money away from police and firemen, and the drill. But it's a tax increase. Yeah. I mean, it's just pretty simple. You want to increase sales taxes on internet sales, and you just want to hand it out to. I mean, the Big Ten get the lion's share of it. They claim it's just hard, more expensive to run a city like the size of Madison than it is Paint Rock or wherever you are in Alabama. Oh, I looked out Hoover. That's the one I forgot. Yeah. But that's what they're trying to do. It's a tax increase, but I'll say this, and just talking to lawmakers, it's DOA. The first problem they have is Chris England, who's the state rep from Tuscaloosa, is sponsoring it. I mean, that should tell you what you need to know. You don't have any Republican sponsorship. The Big Ten are putting a lot into this. They're really making a push, but I think it's just tone deaf. It's absolutely tone deaf to do it this way and think that people will not see anything more but it's just a blind grab for money.
Yeah, and especially, when inflation has never been higher, and people's wages, and it's just, cost of gas, cost of groceries, cost of everything is insanely high, and they're like, you know what, we're really struggling in our city budgets, and it's like, right. I don't think anybody, really cares. If you're running a ministry or you own a business, my guess is that you've been thinking about starting a podcast for a while now, but for various reasons it hasn't happened yet. Send me an email. I need to personally connect you with Yonder Child Media. They built this studio in 2 days and tackle all of the production. I just come in, start talking, and leave. It's that easy. They do everything else. Whether you want to record at your business or a home office like they just built for me, you come in, start talking, and Yonder Child will do everything else. Send me an email. That's going to be BRYAN, Brian.Dawson, DAWSON, at 1819news.com, and I'd be happy to personally connect you. Speaking of big city issues, Glock switches. What's happening there?
So the problem here with the Glock switch is it's federally banned. ATF enforces it. You can't have a Glock switch, and they will say, yeah, it's this little device. It turns your handgun into a machine gun, and I don't think that's quite accurate, but that's the way it's whatever. These things are bad, and I guess they could be like manufactured on a 3D printer or something. But anyway, that being said, the problem is these Glock switches are being used, and they were used in the Hush Lounge, I think, shooting at 5 Points South in Birmingham. And the problem is that the state can't enforce a ban, or the state doesn't have it on the books to enforce the ban. So, for example, if you get pulled over by Birmingham PD and for whatever reason they catch you with a Glock switch, well, there's no crime there that they could charge you with. They would just have to, charge you with whatever else they could get you on, but the Glock switch, no. So the problem is this: they want to give local law enforcement the ability to enforce a Glock switch. The legislature's probably going to do it. It'll probably have bipartisan, near unanimous support. I think you'll have a few Second Amendment advocates saying no, this is just a slippery slope to gun control, and rightly so. So Brian, I'd watched this though. I was thinking about this, like, okay, let's say gangbanger Jeff decided he needed some Glock switches, and next thing I'm getting pulled over by the police in Montgomery or wherever, and they charge me with Glock switch possession. How do you prosecute that? My defense, I would have to say, well, this is a federal crime. They did this with immigration, right? When they passed HB 56, the federal government has jurisdiction here. It's the supremacy clause. Didn't you go to and study basic civics? And if I'm like in court, I think I use the same defense. Like, this is a federal crime. You need to charge me with a federal statute, and this is out of your jurisdiction. So, to be honest, I think it's just like a feel-good measure. I understand it. I know that these things are bad and something needs to be done, but this is probably where we ought to demand more out of our federal law enforcement to handle these things. Go after the manufacturers or whatever. But I just, there's something about it that bothers me that it's like a virtue signaling sort of act of the legislature.
Yeah, that's exactly what I see it as. And I'm pretty sure if a state level, state trooper, municipal cop, whatever, city cop, sheriff, whatever, pulls somebody over and they have a Glock switch, just like if a person was federally prohibited from owning a firearm, and they get pulled over by a state trooper, the state trooper has the discretion on whether or not to call the ATF,
the federal,
and turn them in or not, because it is not illegal for a felon to own a firearm in the state of Alabama, but it is by the feds. And so the arresting officer has the discretion, and I'm sure there's a protocol in every agency that it's a must turn them over to the feds. And so you would hold them until the ATF picked them up, and then they would charge them with a federal crime. I imagine that it's the same as the Glock switches. I'm not 100% sure, but either way, but I'm with you on the virtue signaling nature of it. It's like, there's a Henry David Thoreau quote, I think it is, where he says, every 1,000 chopping at the leaves of evil, for every 1,000 chopping at the leaves of evil, there's one chopping at the root. No one wants to talk about what the real issue is.
Yes.
John Young will talk about it. Sergeant John Young at the Mobile Police Department. He talks about it. It's a culture issue. It's a fatherlessness issue. It's
such a great point. Whatever the issue is, Brian, do we think if they pass a Glock switch bill tomorrow, governor signs into law on Friday, crime's going to change in Birmingham?
No.
Not
even a little.
Let's not kid ourselves here. I mean, do it if you need to, but don't act like it's the cure.
The panacea. Yeah. Yeah, no, and again, it's all about feeling better, anyway, we'll see. I hope they don't do it just from the, sake of,
they're going to do it. I mean,
yeah.
it's just the media, and they'll, and what'll be even more obnoxious is it'll be treated like a big, a big win. And, the governor, and when she gives her final State of the State address a year from today, she'll talk about how awesome it is, I guess.
Yeah. Would love for her to have corresponding murder rates up or down when she does that. All right. Well,
and that's a great point. They're putting themselves out here on a limb.
Yeah.
If you do this and things don't change for the better, then what are you going to say?
Yeah. Well, we've got a few minutes left and a couple more topics. I'm just going to throw them out there and let you pick what you want to talk about. One of the things I've been hearing a lot about is the big contractors. It's going to be your Hoare Construction, Brassfield, Gorey, Cadell. Those guys are working to waive Title 39 competitive bidding requirements, and then immigration, restoring the 10 Commandments, and innovation districts. So you pick which ones you want to cover there.
Well, let's go with the waiving the bid requirements.
Okay.
I don't think this will happen. I think the mortal sin here was the Elmore County Prison.
Yeah.
And construction management, and there's some other projects, big projects. I think the West Alabama corridor has some aspects to it that we're not bidding these big projects and holding these contractors to a price. We're operating on this construction management idea where the price just kind of floats to whatever the contractors say it should be, because they're designing it and they're building it as they go along, and that's just not good for government. That might work in the private sector,
Yeah.
but you can't impose a system like that in government, okay? Especially on these mega projects, because as we've talked about it here multiple times, how do you take, we have this special session, and I was really sold on it, Brian. I recall talking about the prisons. For whatever reason, during that special session, I was in Washington, D.C., and it was Steve Klaus, who was general fund chairman at the time, was explaining it. He explained it to me on a radio show, and it sounded like, wow, that's actually a good way to do this. It was like, look, we got this surplus because government was taking in more
Money than
tax revenue than it was using, because you had responsible budgeting, and that was number one. It was sitting in this account over here. And then number two, you had this COVID relief money that while Georgia, while Florida, while Tennessee, Mississippi were looking at ways to give their citizens tax relief, we were going to do the responsible thing, and we were going to do stop violating the 8th Amendment of the Constitution and build a prison. I was like, okay, and do what you got to do. Nobody was really like clamoring for that, but here we are. And then they were going to bond the rest, and the governor was going to, had tried to do it on her own, but she got caught up in the BLM stuff, and they weren't going to let this private contractor, this consortium of private contractors, and they couldn't get bonding for this project, so we'll just let the legislature handle it. And that's how they chose to handle it, and the price tag they had assigned to it was $630 million. You figured it would go up. They always do, right? $630 million wasn't going to stand. Well, lo and behold, I mean, I suspect probably intentionally, Brian, they lowballed it. They lowballed the hell out of it. They lowballed it, and come to find out, when it was all said and done, when Cadell finally started, moving ground and putting up, pouring foundations, well, we're going to need a lot more money here, to the tune of $1.2 billion. So the price doubled, essentially. But the money that they had allocated was supposed to build 2 of these prisons. Instead, it's barely going to build 1, if even that. And that was a product of construction management. We were told when they did the special session, this was the only way it could be done, because construction management was the most efficient. It was going to get the federal system off our backs. The DOJ was coming for us. We were violating the 8th Amendment. And the only way to stop violating the 8th Amendment, it wasn't to try to go clean up the corruption among the corrections officers or any of the other low-level bureaucrats at the Department of Corrections. It was to build a mega prison, 2 mega prisons, one in Elmore County, one in Escambia County. And we had to do it right away. We had to do it soon, or we were going to be facing a federal takeover like Governor Wallace faced in the late 70s, and Fob James had to clean up in the 80s. We had to act fast, and that's what they chose to do with the construction management model, because we bought into that, and then things kind of moved at a snail's pace, to be honest. But as it turned out, they could have bid this and done this the old-fashioned way, bid build, and probably have met the same kind of deadline they're meeting now, I suspect. But we would have known a price tag. We'd had something more certain. And I think these contractors, they may want this, Brian, but the lesson had to be learned the hard way with the state. I think that is sort of the reason why you won't see something like that happen. So there you have it. And one thing I'll say about these opportunity districts, I know we're running short on time here. Yeah. This is the way it looks to me. If you recall, a few years ago when DeSantis had his feud with Disney, they had the Reedy Creek district, where essentially they gave Disney all this autonomous power. It was like sort of its own functioning government. It had all its own, boards and law enforcement or whatever. And it was like, when DeSantis pulled the rug out from under them, it was like somebody in the state, a light bulb went off. Like, they let Disney do that. It had to be somebody at Southern Company at Alabama Power. It's like, why don't we get some of those for ourselves in this state?
Yeah.
And I think it was like, that's sort of what this turned out to be. And I don't know what it's going to be. I've heard, I've heard talk about Pfizer somewhere in the Birmingham area, maybe Shelby County. I don't know the specifics, but I would be very concerned about the sort of not knowing as much as we should and being so excited about it. It just makes me very wary.
Yeah, definitely does. And I know a lot of our supporters and people that read 1819 News, I'd probably say, I always kind of make the joke when there's these huge gambling pushes. I go all over the state speaking like crazy. Like, I'm always somewhere giving a speech to somebody. And I ask them a lot of times, what is the thing that's most important to you as you think about your children and grandchildren and this culture and the future of our state? What concerns you the most? And I always say, how many times someone said gambling? 0 times, none. But the thing that I actually hear probably more than anything, it's at least in the top 3, is these innovation districts and the corruption and the World Economic Forum and the globalists and all this. This is kind of how
corporation. They're gonna, everything the state does, it's so centered around big business. And I'm telling you, if we have a lawmaker or two who listen to this and object to what we're saying, but it's just kind of stuff. It just piles on at some point. The dam is going to burst, and you're going to have like a big Jim Folson moment or whatever. You're going to have a populist situation. You're going to have a Donald Trump. Yeah. And I don't, who that may be, I don't know. But if it happens, and this stuff's just going to get undone, or it's don't be the straw that broke the camel's back, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, I think this is good. Jeff, thank you for coming on and kind of sharing your insight on this very important topic. And then, we're going to roll into the overtime segment, and Jeff and I are going to discuss our thoughts on what's going on in the first 14 days of the Trump presidency. Again, Jeff, thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yep. All right, guys, that'll wrap it up for this week. Until next time, put your trust in God and keep your powder dry.